The cloudy morning looked like a omen of what was coming. The gray sky reflected my mood as I walked down the wet sidewalk, listening to the soft sound of the raindrops that were beginning to fall. Upon arriving at the police station, an ancient building that exuded an air of abandonment, I was received by the strong smell of old coffee mixed with the poignant odor of molded paper, a combination that seemed to stick to the walls. By entering the narrow and poorly lit corridor, I was immediately taken by a sense of discomfort. The lights blinked intermittently on a row of metal chairs where some people were waiting, absorbed in their own problems. The atmosphere was controlled chaos, with police and administrative staff moving around, exchanging papers and information in a frantic dance. I approached a counter where an employee was busy typing something on an old computer whose screen flashed irritably. I waited patiently, watching the movement around me. I was invisible in that sea of people and processes, just another lost soul in search of resolution for a small theft. Finally, the employee raised her eyes tired and full of almost automatic indifference. "No?" she asked, without diverting her fingers from the keyboard. I, my wallet was stolen. I would like to register a police report, I said, trying to keep my voice firm despite the growing apprehension. She nodded mechanically and started asking me questions about what happened. I answered each one, feeling that my story was just one of so many others she had heard that day. It was as if my presence there was no real importance, a mere procedure to be fulfilled. As I described the lost documents and cards, I noticed a police officer stopped a few meters, watching carefully. He seemed to have captured something in my words, something that had caught his attention. Ignoring the feeling of discomfort that his gaze caused me, I continued with the account. After finishing, the employee handed me a copy of the newsletter, and I was about to withdraw when the policeman who watched me approached, the countenance loaded with a seriousness that made me shudder. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cutting the heavy air from the waiting room. "Can you accompany me, please?" The surprise took over me, and I hesitated for a moment. "Follow? Where?" I asked, trying to disguise the growing nervous concern. "There is something we need to clarify about his situation," he answered enigmatically, gesturing that I follow him by a side aisle. My heart began to beat faster as I followed him, my mind running with questions and assumptions. What could be so important? What else could be happening beyond the theft of my wallet? He led me to a small meeting room where the atmosphere was even more oppressive. The walls were decorated with public security campaigns posters, and a single window let the cold day of the cloudy day. I was instructed to sit down, and he closed the door, isolating us from the corridor's buzz. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. The policeman sat in front of me, an indecipherable expression on his face. "It seems that there is a misunderstanding," he began, choosing the words carefully. "In our records, you are listed as missing." The revelation hit me like a surprised punch in the stomach. Missing? How was this possible? I felt the floor flee under my feet, the world around me spinning as I tried to process the information. "Missing?" he repeated, surprised, incredulously. "But I'm here. I've never been missing." He watched me with evaluative eyes, trying to capture any sign of mistake or confusion. "I understand that this is a shock," he said, his voice now softer. "We need to find out what is happening. Can you help us understand how this started?" As I tried to gather my thoughts, a part of me couldn't help but feel that this was just the tip of the iceberg, a prelude to something much larger and more complex than I could imagine. The innocent visit to the police station, which initially seemed to be just a banal task, was about to turn into a maze of mysteries and revelations. The clerk, a middle-aged man with gray hair and an expression of tiredness that only the years of service could sculpt, gave me a time-consuming, as if trying to fit the pieces of an invisible puzzle. His gaze toured my face, hesitated, and returned to the computer screen, where the words flashed with insistence. There was something disturbing in his attitude, a recognition that seemed to shake the solid walls of his routine, used to bureaucratic numbness. "Can you wait a moment?" Resor for my answer. His voice had an urgent tone that made me feel a fearful chill through the spine. He stood up with a contained determination and disappeared quickly through a side door, leaving me alone with my growing doubts. The silence of the room was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of hasty steps in the hallway. My hands were cold, and my heart beat hard, each pulse echoing like a drum inside my chest. What could be happening? What face he remembered, and why it disturbed him so much? I felt like an actor trapped on a stage where the script was unknown, where each scene brought an unexpected new turnaround. Shortly thereafter, the clerk returned, accompanied by another severe-looking police officer whose impeccable uniform contrasted with the police station's worn out. The new policeman, whose presence emanated an undisputed authority, gave me an evaluative look as if weighing every detail of the situation. "My name is Lieutenant Marquez," he introduced himself, his voice resonating with seriousness. "It looks like we have an unusual situation in our hands. You're really listed as missing in our records. I need you to come with me to clarify some things." I swallowed hard, struggling to maintain the composure as my mind was boiled with unanswered questions. I got up slowly, aware that every movement of mine was being observed with almost clinical attention. The room around it seemed to shrink, the walls closing over me as I followed Lieutenant Marquez through a narrow, illuminated hallway whose lamps blinked briefly, creating dancing shadows on the floor. The lieutenant opened the door of a gathering room, this time larger and brighter, with a long, dark wooden table and worn leather chairs. He indicated me a chair, and, when I sit down, realized that there was a large mirror on the opposite wall. The kind that only sees in interrogation films. "Sir," he hesitated, looking at the documents in his hands before continuing, "Mr. Costa, we need to understand how and why his name is in the records of missing persons." The room seemed to spin around me while trying to soothe the situation. "But that must be some mistake," I protested, my voice loaded with a mixture of unbelief and desperate despair. "I live here in the city. I haven't been out. How may it have happened?" Lieutenant Marquez kept his gaze firm, his impenetrable expression. "That's precisely what we need to clarify. Can you tell us everything that has happened in recent weeks, anything that can help solve this mystery?" I told you about my banal routine, my ordinary life divided between work and home, with details that, to me, seemed tediously ordinary. But now they acquired a new weight in light of this surprised situation. My words were echoed in the silent room, every phrase imbued with an urgency that I didn't know how to possess. As I spoke, I couldn't help but feel observed, as if invisible eyes were attentive to every nuance of my account. The lieutenant heard in silence, occasionally writing down something in a block of notes in front of him, his eyes never turning away from mine. "Is there anything else?" he finally asked, his voice now soft, almost empathic. "Something that may not have mentioned?" I shook my head slowly, still stunned by the reality of my situation. "No, nothing I might remember," I muttered, lost in a sea of uncertainties and assumptions. The lieutenant nodded, as if waiting for this answer. "We will need you to collaborate some more, Mr. Costa. Until we can solve this, you will need to remain available." With a nod, he dismissed me, letting me leave the room with the promise that they would investigate the case. When crossing the corridors of the police station again, the weight of revelation still hung over me, a shadow that could not ignore. What began as an ordinary day had become a puzzle that threatened to alter forever my perception of my own existence. They took me to a small room where the air looked heavier than usual, as if carrying the weight of the unstable stories that accumulated there. As soon as I entered, the silence took over the environment, interrupted only by the low tinnitus of an old computer in the corner. A metal chair was waiting for me in the center of the room, lonely in the cold light of a fluorescent lamp. Lieutenant Marquez followed me, closing the door behind him with a click that seemed to feel my destination. Every step he took like a hammer in my conscience, a reminder of the seriousness of what we were about to confront. He approached his computer, typing with familiar dexterity, and the screen emitted a bluish shine that lit his face with oscillating shadows. "I need you to see that," he said, with a voice that he left room for arguments. The screen displayed a series of data that, at first glance, were indecipherable to me. But in the middle of that soup of letters and numbers were my name and my photo. The blood froze in my veins as he realized the highlighted word in red, "missing." The date next to the word was the desperate final blow. 2 years. 2 years since I supposedly disappeared. The revelation hit me like a cold, overwhelming wave, pulling the floor under my feet. I was there, breathing, living my life with a normality that now looked like a fragile castle of letters about to collapse. That can't be right," I muttered, my voice almost imperceptible, suffocated by unbelief. 2 years? But I never left the city. I've never been away for so long. The lieutenant remained silent for a moment, as if pondering the best way to deal with my confusion. "It's a mistake that we are determined to correct," he finally said, his voice carrying a weight that was not his responsibility, but he seemed willing to carry. As the words danced in the air between us, my mind was shuffled in search of any track, any detail that could explain the surprised discrepancy. A glimpse of fragmented memories began to emerge, but they were foggy, such as shadows that dissolve in the light. Fragments of days that looked familiar but were now stained by doubt. Is there anything you remember? Something that might have caused a mess like that? He asked, fixing his eyes on mine with an intensity that made me feel that he was trying to read beyond the words in the disordered depths of my thoughts. I don't know, I said, frustrated with my own inability to gather the puzzle pieces. My life has always been normal. I work, home, friends on weekends. I can't imagine what could have happened. The lieutenant nodded, as if he frequently dealt with the inexplicable. Let's investigate deeper, Mr. Costa. Your collaboration is crucial to understanding what happened. I left the police station that day with a sense of unreality hanging over me, as if living a life that was not mine. What could have happened 2 years ago? And why did my life go somehow a seemingly unchanged course since then? As I walked the city streets, every face that passed through me seemed to carry a secret, a knowledge that escaped me. I was a stranger in my own existence, desperately trying to cling to the reality I knew. The night fell quickly, and the world around me took a deep blue tone, the shadows extending like spectral hands, trying to pull me to a truth that I couldn't reach yet. I knew I needed to unravel the layers of the mystery that now involved my life, to find out what had happened during those 2 years when I apparently disappeared. But for now, there was only the hope that, over time, the answers would come to light, stripping the truth that remained hidden under the surface of ordinary days. A truth that threatened to redefine everything I believed I knew about myself and the world around me. The news was like a sharp knife cutting through the mist of uncertainty that involved me. Lieutenant Marquez looked at me with seriousness that seemed to weigh tons, as if about to reveal me a mysterious secret that could change everything. "We have more information about your case," he said, his voice firm but surrounded by an aura of empathy. "According to our records, you were last seen leaving a hospital, confused, saying meaningless things." Each word fell on me like a surprised blow, and I felt the world turn around me, as if gravity had decided to play with me. I tried to process the information, but it seemed impossible to fit into the puzzle of my life. "A hospital?" I repeated, clear unbelief in my voice. "But I've never been hospitalized, at least not that I remember." Lieutenant Marquez nodded slowly, as if waiting for this answer. "This is what makes the case even more mysterious," he said, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "The report mentions that you were disoriented, saying meaningless things. After that, you simply disappeared. I sought in my memory any trace, any wire that could connect to that narrative. But everything seemed a desperate emptiness, an abyss that I couldn't cross. My hands were shaking, the confusion growing inside me like a storm about to explode. "It makes no sense," I muttered, more to myself than for him. "My life has always been so normal." "I understand that this is disturbing," the lieutenant continued, his voice now smoother, almost as if trying to calm her. "We need to clarify what happened in that hospital. Maybe there are records, videos, something that can give us a track." The thought of seeing my own confusing and disoriented image leaving a hospital that I didn't remember visiting filled me with an indescribable fear. It was as if I was about to confront a version of myself that I was unaware, a shadow that echoed through time in search of answers. "We need to check the hospitals in the region," he suggested, trying to cling to anything that could bring a little logic to that surreal situation. "Maybe someone remember me, some employee." Lieutenant Marquez agreed, starting to write down in his block. "Let's investigate this. Every detail can be crucial." I felt like a ghost to the drift, an entity without a defined past, present, or future. The notion that my life was suspended in a uncertainty was overwhelming. Every step that took place seemed to move away from the reality I knew, while a scary narrative was beginning to graduate. As the lieutenant was heading on the phone to start investigations, I was standing there, trying to stay calm, while a whirlwind of emotions threatened to swallow me. Fear, confusion, anger, everything mingled in a deafening cacophony inside my chest. And above all, there was a sense of loss, as if an essential part of me had been torn and replaced by an impenetrable mystery. Marquez hung up the phone and turned his attention to me. "Let's start the search immediately. If there is any information that can help us, we will find it." I knew I needed to be patient, that the answers would not come easily, but every moment of waiting seemed an eternity. I was stuck in a shadow game with my own past, struggling to recover fragments from a story that refused to be told. As he left the police station, the sun had already begun to dive into the horizon, dyeing the sky with shades of orange and purple. The city around me continued its indifferent routine, oblivious to the chaos that unfolded inside me. I was a missing man, desperately trying to find his way back to what he considered my life. But as the night approached, a persistent question reverberated in my mind. If I was missing, then who was the man who lived my life during those 2 lost years? And more importantly, what was the true meaning of this impossible account that now defined the course of my existence? The police environment seemed increasingly a scenario of a surreal nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Since Lieutenant Marquez had mentioned the hospital, a sense of unreality had settled in my chest, growing with each new revelation. Now, while preparing to go through the ID test, everything seemed even more confusing and disturbing. The policeman who accompanied me, a man of hard features and tired looking, led me to a room where a biometric identification machine was installed. The equipment was fearful, a technological monolith that promised answers but could also confirm the impossible. I looked at the machine, feeling a strange mix of hope and dread. If she confirmed my identity, we could start setting up the puzzle pieces. If not, it would be dived even deeper into an desperate abyss of uncertainty. "Please put your thumb right here," the policeman instructed, pointing to a small scanner. His voice was neutral, but there was an underlying tension, as if he was eager for the result. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves before pressing my thumb against the scanner's cold glass. The silence in the room was almost palpable. Only the sound of my own heart echoed in my ears. The machine issued a soft sound, processing information as we all waited, prey of our own nervous anxiety. Finally, the screen blinked, showing my image and my name. It was me. Confirmation should have been a relief. But what came then stole any sense of normality that I expected to recover. The words on the screen changed, revealing a detail that made my stomach turn. I was linked to a death certificate. How is this possible? My voice sounded almost like a whisper, the horror pervading each syllable. The policeman beside me was surprised, amazed, his wide eyes fixed on the screen. He turned to his colleague who was standing at the door and whispered something that even more shook my already fragile emotional balance. "It's the second case this month," he said, the clear, surprised unbelief in his tone. Those words, so simple but so meaningful, hovered among us as a dense and impenetrable mist. "According to case?" I asked, feeling the desperate confusion becomes an urgent need and to understand. What is happening here? The policeman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "We cannot discuss the details of other cases," he replied, his professional voice, but dyed with uncertainty. "But we will need to investigate further." The idea that I was not the only one to face something so absurd was a small comfort, but also brought with it a fearful new layer of fear. What could be happening so that two people were given as dead, but were alive, breathing, and claiming their existence? It was an anomaly, a break in the rules of reality I knew. "We need to understand how this happened," Lieutenant Marquez intervened, his presence always an anchor of authority. "We will review other records, check your activities in recent years. Something must have escaped." The promise of investigation was a hopeful spark of hope, but did nothing to relieve the desperate, overwhelming weight of the moment. I was there, physically present, but linked to a piece of paper that declared my end. It was as if living in a parallel world, a distorted version of a life that should have been mine. The lieutenant ordered all data to be compiled, promising to keep me informed with each step. While he and the other police officers moved around me, discussing strategies and checking records, I felt like a viewer in my own drama, powerless to influence the unfolding of events. I left the identification room with the strange feeling of being out of place, an intruder in my own narrative. The shadows stretched down the hallway, and I could hear the distant buzz from the city outside, indifferent to my personal chaos. They had promised me answers, but deep down I knew that each discovery would only raise new questions. As he walked out of the police station, the sky was beginning to dye with shades of dark gray, foreshadowing a storm that seemed to mirror turbulence inside me. Every drop of rain that was beginning to fall was a reminder that my world was crumbling, and I needed to find a way through the rain to rebuild what had been undone. That night, as the wind howled through the deserted streets, I knew I was about to board a journey to unravel not only the mystery of my own disappearance, but also the hidden truth in the shadows of a city that kept more secrets than I could imagine. The folder was placed in front of me with care that suggested that its content was both precious and dangerous. The leather material was spent, stained by moisture and time, as if it had been rescued from a forgotten place. When opening the paste, a cloud of dust escaped, floating lazily under the cold light of the interrogation room. Lieutenant Marquez was by my side, his eyes fixed on what I was about to unravel, a silent presence that offered me a strange comfort. Inside the folder, a collection of photographs rested as a secret that expected to be revealed. I took the first picture, feeling a growing restlessness. It was me, no doubt, but the scene was surprised, completely strange. It was standing in the middle of a deserted road, the darkness of the night involving everything around. The only lighting came from the headlights of a distant car that thrown long and distorted shadows on the cold asphalt. My face, captured in a moment of vulnerability, seemed lost, my eyes aiming at something beyond the rear of the camera. "I've never been in this place," I said, looking at the lieutenant in the hope that he would explain the inexplicable. "I don't remember any of that." He nodded, understanding my surprised astonishment. "These photos were found in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. The place was known to be a meeting point for unusual 51. The careful choice of words did not escape my attention. Unusual activities. What did that mean? My mind was seething with images of clandestine rituals, secret encounters, conspiracies that unfolded under the veil of normality. I continued to flip the photos, each of them a fragment of a life that seemed to run in surprised parallel to mine. In another image, I was in front of an old building, whose Gothic exterior contrasted strongly with the urban landscape around him. There was something disturbing in that architecture, as if the stones kept dark and forgotten stories for time. Once again, there was no memory of having been there. The next photograph was even more disturbing. It was in an open field, the high lawn swing under the wind. The sky was dyed by the rich tones of the twilight, and in the background, an indistinct figure seemed to observe from afar, a shadow between shadows. The feeling of being observed was palpable, even at the frozen moment of the image. A shiver traveled my thorn, and I felt as if that presence, even through time and distance, was still with me. "Who took these photos?" I asked, my voice carrying a wire of despair. "Who was with me?" Lieutenant Marquez exchanged a significant look with the police next to him before he answered. "We're investigating. It seems that you were being followed, Mr. Costa. Someone was documenting your steps, and we don't know why." The revelation was like a punch in the stomach, stealing my air. The notion that my life had been monitored, each movement recorded by someone in the shadows, was suffocating. But what was even more terrifying was the recognition that, at some level, I had allowed it to happen without realizing it. "We need to determine when and where these photos were taken," the lieutenant continued, his voice firm but kind. "This can give us clues about what really happened to you." I nodded, still stunned, trying to find some logic amid chaos. Perhaps there was a rational explanation, a mistake, or a bizarre coincidence. But in fact, a fearful, growing fear inside me whispered that reality was much more complicated, more mysterious than I could imagine. While the lieutenant and his team moved to start investigations, the images remained before me, a gallery of a past that did not recognize like mine. Each photograph was a silent scream of an invisible life, a story told through stolen moments. As I left the room, the folder still in my hands, I realized that it was time to confront the shadows of my own past, to face the places I never visited and the people I never knew, but somehow shaped the course of my existence. It was a path that promised more questions than answers, but I knew I needed to move on. The fate that was waiting at the end of this journey was uncertain. But it was mine, and I was determined to claim it. The sense of freedom when leaving the police station was illusory. Every step I took seemed to echo in a deafening silence, as if the whole city was retreating, waiting for something I couldn't understand yet. My thoughts were a storm of doubts and uncertainties, revolving around the only certainty I had: I couldn't get out of town. It was an order that carried the weight of an unveiled secret. As I walked away from the building, the cold afternoon wind caressed my face, a constant memory that, despite everything, I was alive. However, the life I had known seemed distant, almost as a dream I had aroused in a new and inclemented world. The smell of the city, a mixture of pollution, coffee, and imminent rain, was somehow comforting, an anchor in a desperate sea of chaos. The way home was familiar, even if every corner and every face seemed different now, as if a veil had been raised, revealing a fearful scenario of shadows and suspicions. The sound of the cars passing was mixed with the murmurs of people on the sidewalks, creating a dissonant symphony that reflected the nervous whirlwind inside me. When I got home, the first thing I did was lock the door, as if it could protect me from the fearful mysteries that still hovered over me. The apartment, which was once a sanctuary of tranquility, now seemed empty, echoing the silence that settled in my life. Each object, every photo on the walls, was a reminder of what I thought I knew, but now it was covered by a shadow of doubt. I sat at the kitchen table, the leather paste worn before me as a silent challenge. The photographs were still there, each a fragment of a reality that escaped me. I spread them on the table, looking for clues, for any detail that could help me decipher the mysterious that unfolded before me. Looking at those images, a new emotion began to form inside me, a silent but ardent determination. The idea that someone had followed every step of mine, documented my existence without my knowledge, was an affront that could not be ignored. I needed to find answers, not just to myself, but to understand why someone was so interested in my life. I took my phone, hesitating for a moment before calling Lieutenant Marquez. His voice sounded clear and firm, a calm breath of stability amid chaos. "Mr. Costa," he answered, the formality in his tone a reminder of the weight we both carried. "Lieutenant, I need to know more about these photos," I started, trying to keep my voice firm. "Is there anything we can do to find out who took these photos? Any clue about where they were taken?" He paused, the sound of papers moving in the background before answering. "We are analyzing the images, looking for any detail that can tell us more about the place and the date. Unfortunately, it takes time." Frustration bubbled under the surface of my outer calm, but I knew I needed to be patient. "I understand. Please keep me informed. I need answers." "Of course, Mr. Costa. I will do my best to keep you up to date," he promised, before turning off. The silence once again took up the space around me. But this time, there was a confident resolution amid uncertainty. I needed to do something, anything, to start joining the pieces of this puzzle. Perhaps there was someone in the city who could help me, someone who knew the places in the photos, who could recognize the scenarios. 65. I decided to visit a friend, someone who always had a keen view for details and insatiable curiosity. Pedro, an amateur photographer who knew every corner of the city. Upon arriving at his studio, I was greeted by an explosion of colors and images hanging on each wall, a vibrant celebration of life captured through its lens. Pedro received me with a warm smile, but soon became concerned to see seriousness in my face. "What happened, friend?" he asked, gesturing for me to sit. "I need your help," I started, putting the photos on the table between us. He examined them with a critical look, his expression changing as he absorbed every detail. "These are good," he murmured, almost to himself. "The compositions are interesting, but they have a mysterious quality, as if something is out of place." "Do you recognize any of these places?" I asked, hope squeezing my chest. Pedro studied the photos for a moment before pointing to one of them. "This building, it looks like the old hotel in downtown. It's been closed for years, but some people have been there to explore." My heart leaned. It was a hopeful beginning, a track that could take me to the next step. "Thank you, Pedro. It already helps a lot." He nodded, still looking at the photos with a growing curiosity. "If you need more help, just call. I'll take a look at some nets to see if anyone shared something like." Gratitude filled my heart as I left the studio, feeling that it was, for the first time in days, advancing towards some form of truth. The path in front of me was still uncertain, but each step took me closer to unraveling the mystery that had rooted in my life. As I walked back home, the city around me seemed less threatening, every less suspicious face. I knew there was a lot to find out, but now I had a direction, a purpose that illuminated the way through the shadows. And while the night fell over the city, a new determination was lit within me, promising that no matter how obscure the journey, I would find the answers that sought so much. That night, as the darkness spread like a heavy cloak over the city, I was lying in bed, my mind still spinning with thoughts about the photos and the revelations of the day. The silence of the apartment was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of cars passing the street below. My eyes were fixed on the ceiling, as if the answers to what I was tormented could materialize there, among the dancing shadows projected by the light of the street. It was then that my cell phone rang, the unexpected sound cutting the silence with an urgency that made my heart jump to the chest. I sat quickly, the device vibrating on the bedside table, its bright screen displaying an unknown number. A part of me hesitated, a primitive instinct of self-preservation warning about the potential danger of answering the connection. But curiosity and the desperate, desperate need for answers won. As he slides his finger down the screen and bring his cell phone to his ear, the voice on the other side hit me with the force of surprised. It was hoarse, loaded with a fearful threat that made the hair on my neck shiver. "You shouldn't have come back." The phrase echoed on the line for a moment before absolute silence took its place. I was there, paralyzed, absorbing the implicit meaning in that warning. Who could be? And what exactly should I have come back to face? The call was short and mysterious, but the message was clear. Someone, somewhere, was watching me, aware of my movements, and wanted me to know that. The feeling of being observed, which had already been insinuated by the photos, now solidified in an overwhelming certainty. I was on someone's radar, and that someone didn't want me to keep digging deep into the mysteries that surrounded my life. The adrenaline pulsed in my veins as I got up and began to walk through the apartment, trying to sue what had just happened. The questions huddled in my mind like a swarm of restless bees. Who was the person behind that voice? Was it trying to protect me or threaten me? And what I was covered, or was about to find, that it was so important that it attracts this kind of attention. I decided I needed to talk to Lieutenant Marquez immediately. He was the only person who knew the complexities of my case and could offer some kind of perspective on the connection. I grabbed the phone again, my heart still beating hard, and drew your number with trembling hands. He answered after a few touches, his voice sounding quiet, but warns, as always. "Mr. Costa, did anything happen?" I told him about the connection, every word coming out quickly, a release of the tension that had accumulated since the mysterious voice had reached me. He heard in silence, occasionally muttering a "I understand" or "continue" that encouraged me to continue. "That's worrying, Mr. Costa," he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of the implications we both knew exist. "Someone is trying to scare you, or maybe deviate you from what's going on." "And it's working," I admitted, feeling angry frustration and fear mingle in an explosive cocktail inside me. "What should I do?" There was a break before he answered, as if he was carefully pondering his words. "Stay vigilant. Do nothing impulsive. I will intensify the investigations and see if we can track the call. If something else happens, let me know immediately." I hung up, feeling a mixture of relief for not being completely alone and an increasing anxiety for what could come next. The night, which once promised to be a break for reflection, was now a battlefield where my thoughts crashed a war against uncertainty. I decided to review the photos once again, looking for any detail that could have gone unnoticed at first glance. I spread them again on the table, the soft shine of the reading lamp casting a light focus on each image. It was then that I noticed something that had previously escaped me, a shadow in one of the photos, which did not belong to anything visible in the scene. It was an indistinct figure, almost imperceptible at first glance, but clearly present once my eyes fit to see her. The discovery gave me a shiver, but also lit a energetic spark of determination within me. If there was something or someone hidden in the shadows of my life, I was confident, determined to bring them to the light. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that the way ahead was full of dangers and uncertainties. But the same inner voice that had warned me when the phone had now touched that I was on the right track. As the night was moving, I sat at the window, watching the city lit by a million lights, each telling an invisible story. A feeling of disasters remained, but the hopeful that the answers were within my reach if I was confident, brave enough to pick them up. It was a force that propelled me to move on. And then, as he watched the shadows move around the city, a confident, renewed determination took over me. I was not just struggling to find out who had observed me or why, but also to claim my own identity, my place in a world that seemed determined to erase me. With this resolution in mind, I knew that regardless of the veiled threats and unresolved mysteries, I was not alone. He had allies, such as Lieutenant Marquez and Peter, and a growing desire to fight the shadows that tried to swallow my life. And that, I knew, was more confident than any whispered threat in the dark.